That's good, right there. Start up the camera, please. All right, Fred. All right. Yay!
It wasn't quite the shot heard round the world, but the sneeze of Thomas Edison's employee Fred Ott, the first copyrighted motion picture, launched one of the most ruthless, relentless, and comical wars in the history of American commerce. The inventors, industrialists, and entrepreneurs who built the American film industry did not set out to create a new art form. They meant to make money by feeding the nation's new and insatiable appetite for motion pictures. They stole technology and talent from each other. They formed illegal monopolies and cut shady deals with even shadier characters. They double-crossed friends and hired private eyes to spy on their competitors. They even led armed raids on rival studios. And in the midst of all this chaos, they somehow managed to create a system for manufacturing and distributing what would become America's most profitable and most influential product, mass entertainment. But these fierce battles claimed some victims along the way. Fort Lee, New Jersey, once the movie capital of the world, became a studio ghost town. As producers moved to the West Coast in search of better weather and to get away from Thomas Edison's patent detectives. And Thomas Edison himself, hailed as the father of the motion picture, had to cede control of the industry to a handful of merchants and showmen who became the first generation of Hollywood moguls.
Go ahead.
America rolled into the 20th century belching smoke and burning rubber, giddy with the promise of better living through technology. The American experiment was in full flower, and nobody personified the spirit of progress better than Thomas Alva Edison.
All right.
Edison increased the speed of telegraph transmission, shrinking the distance between the western frontier, which was officially closed in 1890, and the new urban frontiers of industry and commerce, as imagined by men of science. Edison improved the telephone, which connected factories and warehouses with offices and stores. The Edison stock ticker enabled investors to stay in constant contact with their money. And Edison's dynamos and electrical generators helped make modern nightlife possible for the millions of citizens who were discovering a new and highly pleasurable concept, leisure time.
There were a number of factors that contributed to the environment for mass entertainment at the turn of the century, one of which was increased leisure time, another of which was urbanization, that there were a lot more people located in the cities now, looking for some form that would entertain them. And a third was the nature of those people, which were disproportionately immigrant and working class. And the immigrants did not necessarily speak the English language, so they wanted something that was accessible to them. And finally, there was a kind of overarching factor, and that was the desire, not only their desire for some kind of cultural nucleus, but the desire of the country generally for some kind of identifiable American art form, something that was not European, something that was ours.
So Thomas Edison, the man who was expected to supply all of the nation's needs, went into the entertainment business.
Edison is a machine person. He built machines, and he understood what machines would do. And ultimately, you have him having problems as soon as he's over into an area of entertainment. He was having trouble with the phonograph at this time because his original conception of the phonograph was that it was a business machine. The moving image was a toy, really. It was a parlor game that children played. Edison had no conception of where the audience would be for the motion picture. He never had conceptions of using any of his devices for frivolous entertainment kind of purposes.
Joining me is Neil Baldwin, who is the author of a new biography of Thomas Edison called Edison, Inventing the Century. And
Hello.
I think you are the man to answer my question.
Yes, I am.
Before I even read your biography of Edison, everything I knew about him would lead me to believe that he is absolutely the wrong man to go into the entertainment business, workaholic, etc.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at his childhood, he grew up in a very entrepreneurial but a work-oriented family. He went to work right away on the railroads as an itinerant telegrapher throughout the Midwest. It's true, he was a real tinkerer, someone who was very interested in the interstices of machines, somebody who just wanted to get out there, get into the marketplace right away.
And probably didn't play much himself. His idea of fun was work.
Well, as a matter of fact, I was just reading an anecdote from when he was a boy coming home from working on the train. He would practice telegraphy with a whalebone stuck into the dining room table in the crack, and his parents would have to get up in the middle of the night and tell him to stop working, you know, Tom, go back to bed. 10 years old, 12 years old, he was a workaholic.
Well, another part of the Edison myth is this idea of the solitary inventor who worked all alone, when in fact he was sort of the CEO of a huge complex. He had many projects going on at the same time, and he had to delegate.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think one of the main marks of his genius was he knew how to hire the right people. He really knew where the gaps in his knowledge were. He was not an educated man. He needed people who were mathematicians, engineers, biologists, chemists. All the different sciences had to be represented, and he knew how to hire the right people for those jobs.
And what was the relationship between Edison and his managers? How did he run his business?
Well, he was a very hands-on manager. As a matter of fact, in the period we're talking about now, when Edison's son actually took over as president of the company, Edison still was involved in a very hands-on way every single day. They were writing memos back and forth. He really had a lot of trouble ceding control to anyone.
Well, I know he also required an enormous amount of loyalty from his employees.
Absolutely. That's the other side of the coin, is as much as you're under control, you're going to swear fealty to this person, especially if he's giving you an economic ticket to the future by giving you a percentage of any of the inventions that you worked on.
So he got the credit and they got a percentage.
Yes, I mean, they were really footnotes to history, and he was the history. You could look at it that way.
Well, Edison has always been mythologized as the father of the motion picture, but in fact it was actually the work of many hands, as we shall see.
What do I say now?
Same thing.
Same thing. The first motion picture studio ever set up in the world was in the yard of my laboratory at West Orange. The building revolved to follow the sun. We dubbed it the Black Maria because it was covered with black paper outside and in.
The Black Maria, the world's first movie studio, was built in 1893. It was designed by the Edison employee in charge of motion picture research, William Kennedy Laurie Dickson.
With its flapping sail-like roof and ebony hue, it has a weird and semi-nautical effect, and the uncanny effect is not lessened when, at an imperceptible signal, the great building swings slowly around upon a graphited center, presenting any given angle to the rays of the sun. This distribution of light and shade are productive of the happiest effects in the films.
W.K.L. Dickson had emigrated from England at age 19 in hopes of going to work for his idol, Thomas Edison. He rose rapidly in the organization to become one of Edison's most favored and overcommitted employees.
Dickson has a sort of cocky character to him. There were people on the staff at the laboratory who didn't like him. There's an aggressive personality about him that comes out in almost everything he does.
It was Dickson who produced and directed the first commercial motion pictures in America, starting with Fred Ott's famous Sneeze. Dickson chose the subjects. And supervised the lighting and camera work, such as it was. Sometimes he even starred in them, as in this experiment with synchronized sound. And it was Dickson, not Thomas Alva Edison, who invented the first successful motion picture camera in America. But it was Edison who got the credit and became known as the father of the motion picture.
In our early experiments, photographs were arranged in spiral form on a cylinder about the size of the wax phonograph cylinder of the period.
Dickson and his research team spent the better part of 2 years experimenting with various motion picture devices, while his boss was elsewhere, both physically and mentally. For most of 1888, Edison was in Ogdensburg, New Jersey, personally supervising a huge and ultimately unsuccessful attempt to extract iron ore cheaply to turn it into steel.
Ore milling was a project that was very close to Edison's heart and very close to his pocketbook. Steel was a major industry and people were making big money in steel. Edison was much more certain about the value of steel. To give a comparative relationship, Edison spent about $5 million on ore milling and about $35,000 on the motion picture project.
In 1889, Edison sailed to Paris for the Edison Company's presentation at the Universal Exposition. It was the first big chance for Thomas Edison, Inc. to break into the international marketplace, and naturally it required a personal appearance by the Napoleon of invention. When Edison came home, Dickson greeted him with a surprise.
Welcome back, Mr. Edison. How do you like the projecting kinetoscope?
A projected image on flexible celluloid film with simultaneous phonograph sound, or so he claimed.
I think he did something. How successful it was, I don't know. But what Dickson's really trying to say is that they should change and should go to flexible film. This was the most important single development that made motion picture possible.
In 1891, Dickson's motion picture system was publicly demonstrated in West Orange, but not on a screen. One by one, the guests peered through a small aperture in a pine box and saw Dickson smiling and bowing. Edison was delighted. He instructed his lawyers to prepare patent applications, and Dixon dutifully signed over the copyright of his invention to his employer. Now the race began to have the Edison kinetoscope ready for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair Columbian Exposition, where the merchandisers were expecting big things from the greatest genius of the century. However, not even Thomas Edison could stop the Great Panic, the worst depression in half a century, which stretched from January of 1893 to June of 1894. It struck the economy and the human heart alike. Dixon had a nervous breakdown and left for Florida. And without Dixon's cinematic expertise, the kinetoscope would not be ready for the World's Fair. But by the beginning of 1894, Dixon was back on the job and turning out a steady stream of short subjects from the kinetographic theater. A new corporation, the Edison Manufacturing Company, was established to serve as an umbrella for all of Edison's motion picture concerns. And that spring, the first 25 kinetoscopes were shipped to Atlantic City, Chicago, and Manhattan to newly outfitted kinetoscope parlors, where you could watch a 30-second strip for a quarter. Within a year, there were kinetoscope franchises all over the country. And at $200 a machine, the cash flow was heavy. Edison, of course, also manufactured all of the films that were shown in the machines, and by February of 1895, kinetoscope and film sales revenues totaled more than $177,000. However, Dixon had different ideas about the future of motion pictures and had begun moonlighting with some of Edison's competitors who were experimenting with a projecting machine. In 1895, he quit and officially formed a partnership which became the American Mutoscope and Biograph Company, or AM&B, which turned into Edison's toughest and most canny rival. With Dixon's expertise, AM&B was able to build cameras and projectors that skirted Edison's patents. Dixon designed AM&B's new rooftop studio at 841 Broadway in New York, complete with his signature rotating stage. He even designed a machine to compete with the kinetoscope, a single-view arcade machine called the Mutoscope. Dixon's instincts about projection proved to be right. Within a year, Edison's peephole profits had plummeted from $85,000 to $4,000, and Edison finally caved in and purchased the rights to a projecting machine that was developed by the Philadelphia team of Armad and Jenkins. They wanted it sold under the Edison name as a marketing gimmick, and the wizard was only too happy to oblige. It was promptly renamed the Edison Vitascope and, of course, patented.
Neil, why did Edison resist projection so strenuously? It seemed like it was such an obvious wave of the future.
Well, that you've just answered your own question. I think that Edison had a very control-oriented view of all of his inventions, if you look at them. And I think the one-to-one relationship of the person to the film was what he always saw, the same way with the phonograph. And it's just a question of the single person being entertained, one person at a time. He had no concept of the mass industry that was on the horizon.
Well, there would certainly be a financial incentive because one machine for one viewer, theoretically you sell more machines than one machine for a whole room full. So I suppose there was something, but also something just instinctive that he didn't understand about the power of the big picture.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't aware that the whole country was on the crest of a tremendous expansion into the entertainment business, and we're living in it right now today, for sure. But Edison was really a control person, And he liked the idea that he could control the records that he produced, he could control the light bulb, he could control the concrete houses that he manufactured. These were all things that he had authority over.
But as we saw, he could not control the competition. And when Dixon left, that began a whole series of kind of unfortunate brushes with the competition,
Yes.
who were also entering this industry.
Yes, and there was a tremendous period of litigation when Edison was trying to defend his idea, his informing idea of the motion picture, which he really wanted to keep hold over in perpetuity. And yet the marketplace was there, and all these different corporations were entering the fray in the true American competitive spirit, and Edison was overwhelmed by that.
Well, Edison went on to form a motion picture patents company which tried to control the motion picture industry and failed because the exhibitors kind of came out of the woodwork and ultimately defeated him. But the motion picture business was Edison's to lose.
Absolutely.
Why did, from the biographer's point of view, the motivating factors, why did he let it go, or why did he allow it to get away from him?
I think once he felt satisfied that he had reached the point where he could defend the integrity of the idea of the film going behind the lens, he became bored. He had conquered the technology, as we've seen, and his imagination wouldn't rest. He was forced to move on into other areas, mining and helping with the war effort and all these other much more different high-tech endeavors, and he basically became bored with the field, and there were other people involved in it.
On the other hand, though, he seems to have really held on to that label as the father of the motion picture, and most people know him as the father of the motion picture.
Yes.
So I guess it was important to maintain that link with the movie business?
Yeah, well, I think you've put your finger on the intrinsic part of Edison's personality that really interests me, is his inability to let go of things long after they've already become the purview of the greater public. I mean, if you look at his face on the carton of the light bulb, the actual product is there, identified with him as a brand name.
So this self-promotion, I guess, was a lifelong habit, and even though he may not have actually invented any of these things, it was important to him to be perceived that way.
Absolutely. And to come in on the process that other people had developed, and we see that with all of his inventions, including the motion pictures, to come in on the product at a certain point and to exercise his charisma to the general culture, that was his ultimate goal.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming today. Neil Baldwin's book is called Edison, Inventing the Century, and it's published by Hyperion. And that's State of the Arts for this week. I'm Amber Edwards. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.